I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Era of Reclamation talk. I invited Bonnie Greer to curate a project, and together we identified reclamation as a prevalent theme of our era. This is also an opportunity to listen and to learn as we move towards the great transformation of the British Museum.
Both of you have been the first Black women in almost everything you've done in this country in many ways. Can I ask you, what have your experiences with refugees shown you both about resilience and the human ability to start again? Because this year is about healing. And Rose, can I start with you to ask you that question?
I think what I would say to that is, what I have seen is a zest for life. Everything is taken from you. Every so-called normal thing or familiar that you have is stripped from you. And yet there is this reaching out still for life, a reaching out that sees, actually it's an ability to see that, okay, I'm in this situation, but the hope that there is more, the hope that change is gonna come, and they keep going. And it is just amazing, literally, to see in the faces of those who have experienced such hardship, this light and ray of hope, not depression, but this ray of hope that it is possible for change.
You're at Dover, and most of us are Londoners here. We live in London. Tell us about Dover. What is that experience like to minister at this point in time in Dover?
I think that the churches there are finding it extremely challenging. Challenging because it's almost sometimes as if they're going against the grain. I think our government and some parts of the community sets up this kind of them and us. And the reality is, you have to see refugees as not one of us. They are other. So I recall one of my archdeacons telling the story of being on the beach and getting ice cream, and suddenly, police come swooping down, with a group, and the fact that there were people cheering that the police had got, and something disturbed me about that image. Of course, nowadays, before they even get into port, get as far by themselves, they are being picked up and taken away immediately, some in camps and other places. But I think there is a real challenge there by people who are conscientious and people who recognize that we don't want these people to be, in inverted commas, incarcerated. We want them to be free. They've reached so far. Why are we doing this? So there is a tension there. There is a tension there that we live with as we try to enable parts of the community to recognize that these are human beings who are simply wanting to improve their lives and the lives of their families.
Patience, do you want to answer or say anything about your experiences with refugees? What has it shown you about resilience and
So I had a very intimate one-on-one meeting with a refugee, and so I heard her story, and in hearing that story I was very aware of how there was a point, which you will hear later, where I say good people come, but those good people could only really have come if she was open. She had that inner resilience anyway, and then she was able to connect with those good people, and she herself was able to start volunteering and actually helping others. But that was a real turning point for her.
Yes.
Now, I think you touched upon two things. One is politics and policy, and the other is the reaction of individuals who encounter refugees very directly, and of course recognize these are my fellow human beings, and at the same time, in their gaze and their perception, there is that moment of othering, which, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of prejudice, perhaps for other reasons. So how do you deal with that question of welcoming, embracing, of the very basic hospitality, which is such a fundamental, if you like, obligation and virtue, and the fact that there is this moment of rejection.
Dignity, solidarity, and hope, I think, are the words that best describes what it means to work alongside those who are refugees. Because firstly, what we need to do is to actually see ourselves. And I think it is a failure to be able to stand in someone else's shoe that actually allows us to treat people as the other instead of one of us belonging. And so for me as a leader within the community, it is imperative that I lead by example, but not only lead by example, but also to be willing gently. And I say gently because I want people to hear what I have to say. And it's no point putting someone's back up. You put their backs up and you've lost them. I do want them to hear. I do want them to engage with what I'm saying. So to gently challenge. And that gentle challenge might come in the form of a question. What if that was your child? How would you respond? Your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, etc. All the time trying to get them to see the human in it all. It's very easy, and I hear them on the radio, constantly throwing out stats. 350 arrived, or 500 this time last year, and we throw the stats out, and what that does, people get sort of, they're swamping our town out, our country, and yet if we were to stop seeing the numbers and look in the faces, engage with the faces and the people, and come back to the place of humanity.
Now, as a poet, would you say, Patience, that you witness, that you give witness, and you've not only made the experience of listening, and that moment of listening you transformed into a great poem, but you've also seen other people listen, read, listen to you, as we will do later. So what does that word do? Is that a gentle word, or is that, what kind of word is that, and what does the word do?
David Hurd said something very interesting in the afterword to the first volume.
Yeah.
And he said there's some sort of, the process of sharing the story meant that then obviously, so obviously my refugee had her own story, she shared it with me, and then in me getting up and publicly sharing it, then there was a sort of collective consciousness emerged from that.
Yeah.
So that witnessing went from one person to two people to the world, you know, to the audience out there. So, and in that sense, there was also a sense of shared responsibility for the story. It was a healing process for the initial person, for the refugee, because the story wasn't just hers anymore. Obviously, she'd experienced it. It belonged to the community, and then the next step from there was that the community would then bear witness and then maybe go out and try to effect change.
Rose, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like? Can you paint a picture for us about what it's like being a priest, being on the front line?
I've done a number of interviews on the radio. Each time something disastrous usually has happened, I've been called on. And I get sometimes some really uncomfortable emails or letters from people who are simply angry at my response. And it's rather bewildering because my responses are actually saying, these people are human beings. They are our brothers and our sisters, our mothers and our fathers. And one of the responses that I had back, which was quite angry, someone writing to say, how dare you say that these people are our mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. They are not, they are Muslims. Now, I've never written a reply so fast because he had also prefaced it by saying that he was an evangelical Christian, you know. I suppose he's, you know, telling me his credentials. But I replied immediately and I told him that I was ashamed to be in that space called Christian with him. So for me, it can be very challenging, and it sometimes feels dangerous because we are living at a time, if you recall, Joe Cox being attacked, murdered, in effect. And it sometimes feels that one is risking all. But it is a risk that I take in speaking out because I think that their voices, their experiences must be honored. And I'm conscious of the fact, actually, that people within the church are some of those who do not take kindly to refugees coming to our shores. I take every opportunity in almost all my sermons of flagging it up. I really do. Intentionally, deliberately.
As that is your witness. Thank you.